In this tutorial, I will be covering save points to keep track of a player's progress throughout a level and completing level objectives to load the next level. I'm going to start by creating a simple scene to use, and I'm using Unity 2019.1 for this demo. So I'll create a ground plane, and I'm going to create a capsule for my player. And now I'm going to create a script for some real simple player movement. And I'm going to attach that script to my capsule. I'm also going to name my capsule player so I can find it easily. For the sake of organization, I'm also going to create a scripts folder and put my player script in that folder. And now I'm also going to create a materials folder so I can make some simple materials so that I can see my player distinct from the ground plane. So I'm going to make a solid color for the ground. And then I'm going to make a different color for my player. Now I'm going to edit the script that I made, which I attached to my player. Should only have one copy of it, and I should be able to see it in the inspector. So I'm going to open up this script in Visual Studio, and I'm going to remove the start function because I won't be using it. And in my update function, I'm going to get component rigid body dot velocity. And I'm going to set this equal to a new vector 3. And the x value for this vector 3 is going to do input dot get axis. So I'm going to get input, and this get axis will get both keyboard input and joystick input from a controller. The built-in ones are called horizontal for the x axis and vertical for the y axis, but for my y value here, I'm actually going to use the current y velocity. And the reason I'm doing this is this will allow the player to fall or jump because my movement is not controlling the y velocity. The y velocity is going to be controlled by physics. Now my z axis is actually going to use the other input. So this would be the y axis on the joystick or the up and down arrow keys on the keyboard. And this one is called vertical. And now this is a real simple player movement. And in order to make it work, I do need to go back to my Unity scene and select my player and give my player a rigid body component. This allows the script to access the velocity of this object. And if I were to hit play and test this right now, what would happen is I'm applying velocity to this object, but because it can roll and fall over, it's actually not sliding around the way I want it. It's just sort of toppling over. So to prevent that from happening, I'm going to go under the constraints of the rigid body, and I'm going to freeze rotation for X, Y, and Z. Now I can move the player around. The movement is a little bit slow, so I probably want to multiply by a value to make it move a little bit faster. So I'm going to take my X and my Z value and multiply both of those by 5. So in the X slot where I currently have input.getAxis horizontal, I'm going to multiply that by 5, and then I'm going to do the same for the vertical. I'm also going to adjust my camera so I can see the scene a little bit better. So I'm going to move my camera up and rotate it to face down. Now my character movement seems a little bit more natural. And if I wanted the camera to move with the player, all I would have to do is attach the camera to the player by dragging it. And now when I move the player around, the camera follows it. I'm going to take the camera back out so that my camera will be fixed for the rest of this demo. But some people like to have the camera stay with the player. You can also use Unity's camera follow scripts, which you can get from these standard assets if you want a more natural, smooth follow effect. So I have my basic movement set up in my scene. Now I want to set up some save points. And the way that you set up save points can kind of depend a little bit on the type of game that you're making. So I'm just going to keep this really generic for right now. So I'm just going to make these little cubes on the ground that when the player stands on them, they will save the player's position at that point and allow the player to progress through the level, and when they die, they will go back to the most recent save point they stood on. So this is going to be my first save point, and I'm going to give it a tag. I need to add a new tag to my tag list. I'm going to call this save point. Now I'm going to set the tag for this as save point, and I want to check the box for is trigger. This will allow me to use the onTriggerEnter function to detect when the player collides with it. I'm also going to give this a material. For now, I'm just going to make it gray. And it might be a good idea to name this so I can find it easily in my hierarchy. Now I'm going to duplicate it a few times. Control D to duplicate. I'm going to go ahead and make 4 of these. And the first one is going to be where the player starts. I want to do this so that when the player first starts, the very first thing that happens is it will save that starting position. So when the player dies, I can take them back to that position. Now I'm going to make a new script. This is going to be a level manager script. And the purpose of this script is to be able to keep track of things that are in each level. Ultimately, when I'm done with this, I will have several levels, and the purpose of the level manager is that there is an instance of the level manager in each scene, keeping track of objects and things that are going on in that scene. So I'm going to name this level manager. Make sure you don't have any spaces in your script name. Scripts cannot have spaces in their names. So in this level manager script, I'm not going to use the start or the update function. For now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to create a public, and I'm going to make an array of game objects called save points. The open and close square brackets is what tells this to be an array, and an array is a set of multiple of the same type of objects. So this is a single variable called save points, and this variable will hold multiple game objects. By making it public, I will make it so that the designer of the level can drag in the save points for that specific level. I'm also not specifying a number. That way the level designer can decide how many save points should be in that level. Now if I go back to my scene, I can create a new empty game object to attach the level manager to. The level manager script won't do anything unless it is present in the scene. So I'm going to call this object level manager. And for game objects, it's fine to have a space. You just can't have spaces for scripts. So I'll attach the level manager script to this object. Now if I toggle this little triangle open for save points, the first thing I see is a number and it says size. And so this is how many of this type of object I want to have access to for this script. So I created 4 in my scene. I'll set that to 4. And now I have 4 empty game object slots. So what I can do is I can drag each of these game objects for the save points into these slots for the script. So I'm just going to drag each one into its own slot. Now in my level manager script, I'm going to create a new function, and this is not going to be one of the standard Unity functions. This is going to be my own function, and I'm going to make it a public function. The reason I'm making it public is because I want to be able to call this function from another script. My player script is going to access the level manager script and call a function. This will return void, meaning it doesn't have a return value, and I'm going to name this function clear save points. Open and close parenthesis and open and close curly brackets. Just like with script names, function names also cannot have spaces. So this is clear save points with no spaces. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the save points change color when the player steps on a new one. So when the player steps on a save point, I want to turn that save point green, and all of the other save points that are not currently active, I'm going to make them blue. So for this clear save points, what I want to do is I want to clear any of the previous save points that have been stepped on. So I'm going to use a for each loop. This will allow me to loop through a set of objects, and the set of objects I'm going to use is this array of game objects called save points. So I'm going to do for each game object, and now here we put the name that we're going to use in this for each loop. So this is just going to be the name of each object as I iterate through them. So I'm going to use S just to keep it short and simple. And so for each game object, which I'm going to temporarily call S, and I want to go through all of the game objects in the save points array. So for each of these objects in save points, I'm going to get component mesh renderer dot material dot color equals color dot blue. So this function is on the level manager, but nothing is calling this function right now. So currently this function is never going to be called. So it's not going to do anything. So now what I need to do is in my player script, I'm going to add an on trigger enter. And I'm going to check if the thing that I collided with, which is called other right here. So if other.tag, I'm going to see if it's tagged as save point. And now here I want to make sure that I spell this the same way that I spelled it in Unity when I created this save point. So if I go back to one of my save point objects, I just want to double check and make sure the tag is spelled the same right here as I spell it in the script. So if the thing I collide with is tagged as save point, then I want to use GameObject.find GameObject with tag. Now you'll notice there's two here. One of them is find GameObjects, plural, and the other is find game object, singular. And I'm going to be finding the level manager. There should only ever be one in the scene at a time. So I want singular find game object with tag, no S. So I'm going to find game object with tag, and I haven't made this tag yet, but I'm going to make a tag called level manager. That way I can find my level manager in the scene. So I'm going to find the object tagged as level manager, and then what I want to do is get component to access the level manager script. And that needs to be spelled the same as the level manager script that I created earlier. And then the function, which I called in my level manager script, was clear save points. Now you might notice that I have a red squiggly line under this word here. There's a bug that I've started noticing recently with Visual Studio that occasionally it does not register new scripts that you've created, that they're in the same project. So what this means is it's saying it can't find this other script. It doesn't think this script exists. And the only solution that I figured out to get it to find the other script is to just close out of Visual Studio and Unity and reopen it. So I'm going to pause the tutorial right now and close and reopen so that Visual Studio will recognize my new script. So after closing and reopening, I was still having that same error. And so what I figured out I needed to do was actually open my assembly C# project, and there was an issue with the way Unity was opening my Visual Studio. Again, this is a kind of a recent issue I've been seeing with Visual Studio and Unity. I only started noticing it happening with 2019, so hopefully that bug will get fixed soon. But the two things I suggest trying is close all the way out of Unity and Visual Studio, or manually open your .cs proj file from your folder. So wherever your Unity project folder is saved, you should see a C# file like this. So now my player script can recognize the level manager file, and my level manager has this function, clear save points. So to make this actually work, I do need to go back and tag my level manager. Let me just make sure it has the save points in it. So I'm going to add a new tag here called level manager. Make sure it's spelled the same as a tag as it's spelled in the script. In my script, I spelled it level manager with a capital L and capital M, no spaces. So this is exactly how I need to spell the tag in my tag list. So I'm just going to go back to the level manager object and apply that tag. Now if I test it, I should see that when my player lands on the first save point, all of the save points turn blue. Now the next step I want to do is when my save points turn blue, the one that I'm currently standing on, I actually want to turn green. So in my player script, after I call this clear save points function, I'm going to do other dot get component mesh renderer dot material dot color equals color dot blue. Not blue, sorry, green. I want the one that I currently landed on, this other. This is the thing that I just collided with. So whatever save point I just collided with, I'm going to turn green. All of the other ones are going to use this clear save points, which will turn them blue. So now I'm going to save that change to my script, and let's test it out. So the one that I landed on turned green, and now each time I step on one, it will turn all of the other ones back to blue, and the one I'm currently standing on will turn green. Now I want to make it so that when I die, it will take me back to the most recent save point that I landed on. And to do that, I need to have a way for the player to die. So I'm going to make a death volume underneath the world. Make a great big old cube. and position it underneath the world. And I'm going to turn off the mesh renderer for this object, so it'll be an invisible collider. And once you have an invisible collider, it can be really hard to find it again. And it can be frustrating later on when you have invisible colliders in your scene that you made by accident. So Unity has this handy little drop down that lets you specify an icon for your invisible collider. That way you can actually select it in the scene. Now this icon won't show up in the game, only in the scene view. So it makes it so that you can easily select your invisible colliders, which you can't do if you just turn it invisible and you don't have an icon for it. You won't be able to easily select it in your scene. So the other thing I want to do is I want to mark it as isTrigger. That way I can use onTriggerEnter. And I also want to give it a tag. I'm going to tag it as death. Make sure you apply the tag after you create it. And now in my player script, this is also going to go in onTriggerEnter. So I'm already checking to see if the trigger is a save point. Now I'm going to check to see if it is tagged as death. Now if it's tagged as death, I want to go back to the most recent save point. And currently I'm not saving any information about the save point. I'm just turning it green so I can visually tell which one I have saved. But I'm not storing that information anywhere. So at the top of my player script, I'm going to make a private vector3, which is going to keep track of the most recent position I want to save. So I'm going to call this save pose so that I can find the most recent save position. And in my save point check, I'm going to actually set that value. So I'm going to set save pose equal to the position of the save point. So when the player collides with it, I might be at the edge or at a corner of it, but I actually want to spawn the player in the center of the save point. So I'm gonna get the transform.position of the thing that I collided with. Now the save points I have are actually in the ground, and so what would happen is the player would spawn halfway in the ground. So I am going to add vector3.up. This will add 1 unit to the Y value of that position. So it'll actually spawn the player 1 unit up from wherever the save point is. So now in my death trigger, I can set the transform.position of my player equal to save pose. So whatever position I saved here, that's where I want to set my player's position. Since my player has physics being applied to it, I don't want the player to spawn with any velocity because since we're falling into the death volume, I might get some weird physics effects if I'm falling too quickly and then I spawn at my save point and I'm still falling with that much velocity. So just to make sure that doesn't happen, I'm going to do get component rigid body dot velocity equals vector3.0 so that my player spawns with no velocity. Now let's test it out. Now it's important that the player actually spawns on a save point because otherwise I wouldn't have a position to respawn the player. So if I didn't have this starting save point, I would get an error if I died before I got to the first save point. So I do want to have a save point where my player is spawning. So currently I have it so that the player can die and they will respawn at the most recent save point they touched. So feedback for the player is really important, letting the player know what they're doing. So I'm going to add for my save points, and unfortunately I did not make my save point a prefab, which means I would have to redo this for all of my objects. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make my save point a prefab. That way when I change one instance of it, it will change all of them. And I'm just going to add some particles and sound effects so that it is easy for the player to tell what they did. So I'm going to make a new folder called prefabs. and I'm going to drag my save point object into that folder, and I'm going to delete the other three that are not the instances of the prefab. So when I make a prefab, I have to delete all of the existing versions of it, and then I can Command D to duplicate, and now you can see that these are blue. That means these are all instances of the prefab. And make sure when you do this, since I deleted them and recreated them, I will need to go back to my level manager and drag these objects back in. You can see it says missing because the one that was in here was deleted. So it's really important that you always check and make sure you have the correct objects in this array. And just to make sure that I didn't mess anything up, all right, so that still works. So what I want to do is, for my save points, I'm gonna click the little triangle, the over arrow next to it, so I'm editing the prefab. This way these changes will be applied to all of the instances in the scene. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a particle system, and I'm gonna change the duration and start lifetime to 1, because I want this to be sort of a short and quick particle effect. And under emission, I'm going to change rate over time to 0, and I'm going to create a burst. I don't want it coming out of the side, so if I go to the shape, set to cone, and so what I can do is I can change this. Normally I use sphere, but this time I'm actually going to use box. And I'm going to set the start speed to 0. And I'm going to give it a negative gravity so that it will come up out of the box. Maybe negative 0.5. And I don't like the magenta squares, obviously. So if you go down to renderer and you click on the circle next to material, you can pick a default particle, or if you have the standard assets, you can pick from one of the particles in there. And I'm going to make the start size let's try 0.2. I see what the problem is. So my particles are being scaled because the cube itself is scaled. So to offset that, I can do a 3D size. And I can set my 3D size to offset from the effect of this scale that's happening up here. Now, I don't want them all to rise at the same speed, so I'm going to, under the gravity modifier, if you select this triangle, you can do random between two constants. And so I could do minus 0.1 up to minus 0.5 so that they rise at sort of different speeds. I also like to use the color over lifetime so that I can have them fade in and fade out. So usually what I do is I create an alpha in the middle that's set to full alpha, and then the start alpha I set to 0, and the end alpha I set to 0. So they will fade in and fade out. I can also change the starting color instead of being white. Since it's turning green when I step on it, I'm going to use green as my particle color. and I don't want it to loop. I just want it to play once. So I'm going to uncheck the box for looping. I'm also going to uncheck the box for play on awake. So I don't actually want this to play as soon as the object comes into existence. I'm going to trigger it to play from my script. I'm also going to add a component for an audio source, which I also don't want to use play on awake. Now, if I have a sound effect that I want to use, I can just drag it into my Unity project. I just found a free sound effect from an online sound effect database. And so now I can just drag this sound effect into my audio clip section. Now, if I hit the back arrow from this, now if I click on any of my save point objects, I can see that they all have this particle effect and they all have the audio source attached to them. So now in my script, when I step on a save point, I want to get component audio source dot play, and then I also want to do get component particle system dot play. So I'll play the sound effect and the particle effect when I land on a save point. So it's important to give the player audio and visual feedback to let them know what happened. Might be a good idea to make a folder for audio in case I'm going to have more than one audio file. So next what I want to do is have a level ending condition so that when the player accomplishes their level objective, they can progress to the next level. So for now, I'm going to have it based on collecting a certain number of objects. So I'm going to put some collectibles in the scene, and I'm going to make a new material for them. And I'm going to make this yellow. And now for my collectibles, I need to use the isTrigger checkbox, and I need to tag them as collectible. And I also want to make this a prefab, so I'm going to rename it as collectible and drag it into my prefabs folder. Now I'm going to duplicate and make a few of these around the scene. So now back in my player script, I'm going to add one more section to my onTriggerEnter function, and I'm going to check if other.tag is tagged as collectible. And if so, I want to destroy the game object for that. And I also want to keep track of how many I collected. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the total number that I can collect, and I'm going to check to see if I've collected that many. So in my player script, I'm going to have an int called, I'm just going to call it coins, even though my collectibles are spheres. I'm going to have them representing coins. I would probably replace them with a coin model for this. So in my if statement, I'm going to add 1 to the number of coins I've collected. Then I will destroy the coin object. Then I will check to see if I've collected all of the coins. So what I could do is if coins is greater than or equal to 3, or I could also do just equal to 3, but I like to do greater than or equal to just in case I accidentally had multiple objects stacked on top of each other. So if my coins are greater than or equal to 3, then what I want to do is load the next level. In a moment, I'm going to make this a variable that the designer for each level can change. That way it's not the same on every level. But for now, I'm just going to use 3. And in order to load between scenes, I need to add at the top of my script, in the using section, I'm going to add using Unity Engine dot scene management. And then in my if statement, I can do scene manager dot load scene. And to load the scene, we need to first know what scene we are currently in, and then we can load the next scene. So what I would do here is scene manager dot get active scene dot build index +1. This will say whatever scene we're in, I want to load the next scene. So the current index of our scene +1 would be the following scene. So I'm going to save this, and now what I need to do is I need to actually add my scene to the build settings, and I need to have multiple scenes in order for this to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do save as. I'm going to put this in my scenes folder, and I'm going to call this one level 1. Now I want my levels to be easily distinguishable between each other, so I'm going to move some of the things around. And I'm going to use a different ground color. And then I'm going to do File, Save As, put this in my scenes folder also, and I'm going to call this level 2. Now the way I have this set up, I can complete level 1 and it'll load level 2. And then when I complete level 2, there won't be anything to load. So I'm going to make one more scene. I'm just going to make an empty scene. And what I want to do is I want to put some text to let the player know that they won. So add UI text, zoom out so I can see where my text is going to be. I'm going to go ahead and put this text in the center of the screen, maybe make it a bit larger. And when you make your font size larger, you also need to make the text box itself larger. You can see the text disappeared here. So I want to make my width and height larger so I can see my text. And I can go to the game window to see what it'll look like. And have this say, you win. And I obviously don't want the Unity skybox behind my you win text. So if you go to your main camera, under the camera section where it says clear flags skybox, you can change this to a solid color. And then you can specify the color you want for your win screen. And you can also change the text color. Might also want to center that text using the alignment and then also centering it on the position. So setting 0 for X and Y. So it's actually right in the center of the screen. You should also set your canvas to scale with screen size under the canvas scaler. That way, when you run your game at different sizes, the text will always show up properly. Now I'm going to save this scene. File, Save As, put it in the Scenes folder, and I'm going to call this Win Screen. Now what I need to do is put my scenes in the right order. So I would go to File, Build Settings, and there's currently nothing in my build settings. So I'm going to put level 1, then level 2, then Win Screen. And I can see this here is the build index over here. So I need to make sure these are in the correct order. And I'm not going to build right now. I'm just going to close out of this window. And I'm going to go back to my level 1 and hit play. Now I can go to a certain save point. I'll respawn there and I can collect my coins. And if I die, since I'm not reloading the scene, I'm just resetting my player's position. So any progress they've made in the level won't be lost. So then I collect all of the coins and it loads me into the next level. Now if I collect all the coins, it takes me to the you win screen. Now, like I mentioned, I want the number of collectibles to be up to the level designer, so the level designer can specify how many there are. So I want to put this in the level manager script. This is primarily where the level designer will put information about the level. So I'm going to make a public variable here called collectibles. Oops, public int collectibles. And I'm going to save that. And now in my player script, instead of checking if my coins that I've collected is greater than 3, I'm actually going to do GameObject.find GameObject with tag. This is just like we did before to find the level manager. Make sure it's singular, find GameObject, not find GameObjects with an S. So find GameObject with tag. And the tag I'm going to be looking for is the level manager. Dot get component level manager dot collectibles. So whatever the level designer puts here is going to be the number of collectibles for that scene. And if I collect all of the ones that the level designer has specified, then I can progress to the next level. So I'm going to save that change. Now in each of my levels, I need to go and find the level manager game object. And I need to specify how many collectibles there are. So in this scene, I have 3 collectibles. So I'm going to put 3 in that collectibles slot and save changes to that scene. Then in level 2, I'm going to make a couple of extra collectibles. So this scene's going to have 5 collectibles. So now in my level manager, for my number of collectibles, I'm going to put 5 and save changes to that. When you hit play, it's going to play whatever scene you have loaded. So since I'm trying to test my level progression, I do always want to go back to level 1 for my testing. So now this level, I specified to have 3 collectibles. And this one should not progress until I get 5 collectibles. So again, that's on the level manager and it goes in the number of collectibles, and you have to set this on each individual level. So now what we have is we have save points that track the player's progress through a level. We have a level objective that lets the player load from one level to the next. And when the player dies, they go back to the most recent save point in their current level, but they don't lose any of the progress they've made for that level. The next step for this would be to keep track of some information from one level to the next. So in the next tutorial section for this, I'm going to show how to create a persistent data that tracks the number of collectibles all the way through the game. And it will display as text. That's it for this video. I hope you found this helpful, and good luck creating your games.